They called it a monster, a massive black stallion, an engine of muscle and fury packed into a gleaming hide. They said he was too wild to break, too dangerous to live. At Carter Ranch, the biggest outfit for 3 counties, the decision had been made. At dawn, the beast would be put down. A clean needle, a quiet end to a violent problem. But when the whole town of Red Hollow gathered to watch death arrive on schedule, a ragged, forgotten man stepped into the corral. He had nothing to his name but the scars on his soul and a silence that drank the sound out of any room he entered. And with one reckless act, he wasn't just challenging a horse. He was challenging everything the people of Red Hollow thought they knew about fear, about survival, and about the ghosts that refused to stay buried. Red Hollow was where the Wyoming prairie forgot to be kind. The town was just a handful of low roofs huddled under a sky so wide and hard it could break your heart. In summer, the dust moved like a living thing, coating your teeth and finding its way into every prayer. In winter, the cold didn't knock. It walked right through your coat and settled in your bones. People in Red Hollow didn't trust things that came easy. They trusted fences that held, engines that started, and conversations that stayed shallow. They were practical people, careful with their compassion the way they were careful with water in a drought. They measured kindness by the work it produced, not the words it cost. And that hard, practical air set the stage for trouble. It was a mood that made hard choices feel like the only choices. It made living things look like problems that just needed solving. Out at Carter Ranch, the evidence was clear. At the edge of the sprawling yard stood a corral built of old oak and railroad ties, and it looked like a battlefield. The posts were gouged with crescent moons where steel shoes had struck like axes. The rails were splintered and scarred. The ground inside was churned into a nervous map of hoofprints. This pen wasn't just holding a horse, it was containing a storm. The ranch hands gathered outside the fence, trying to look like they weren't. They kept their voices low and their hats lower. No one wanted to admit he was afraid to go in there, not even to toss in a flake of hay. The truth was, they all were. In the week since the black horse had arrived, the corral had become a ticking bomb. Even the yard dogs gave it a wide berth. They called him Onyx for the color of his coat. But the men had other names for him when the boss wasn't around. Devil, Hellion, bad luck wrapped in horsehair. He was huge, the kind of huge that made the ground talk back with every step. Sweat slicked his hide, turning the black to a gunmetal sheen that caught the flat morning light. He kicked and stamped, swinging his massive head as if the weight of it was an insult. When he slammed against the rails, the wood groaned a warning. When he bit the chain on the gate, the link screamed like a wire stretched to its breaking point. Every sound he made said the same thing. Stay away. Don't. Or you will be sorry. And the stories grew. They always do when men mix fear with boredom. One hand swore Onyx had thrown a man clean over the fence, snapping his wrist like a dry twig. Another claimed he'd seen the horse lunge at a pickup truck, tearing the side mirror off with its teeth. It didn't matter if the stories were true. They felt true. One look into the animal's eyes was all the proof you needed. There was fire there, sure, but underneath the fire was something colder, something that looked a lot like terror. A terror that had learned the only way to meet the world was with violence, because the world had only ever shown it pain. And that kind of terror was contagious. Hank Doyle managed Carter Ranch, which mostly meant he managed other men's fear. He was a man carved from the same hard land as the town, with thick wrists and a voice sanded down by the wind. He'd never met a problem that couldn't be solved by leaning on it until it broke. And he wasn't about to start now. He stood by the corral with a coil of rope slung over his shoulder, contempt carved into his jaw. "If we don't put that thing down," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "someone's going to bury their boy. Mark my words." A few of the younger hands nodded because nodding felt safer than thinking for themselves. Hank's certainty was a rock they could hide behind. And he liked it that way. The more the horse looked like a monster, the more Hank looked like the only man brave enough to slay it. He spit into the dust. He was staring at Onyx the way you stare at a rattlesnake you're about to kill with a shovel. Samuel Carter, the ranch owner, didn't talk much. He had the posture of a man used to carrying bad news under his hat. The ranch had his grandfather's name burned over the porch and his father's temper buried out by the cottonwoods. Sam had learned to carry his decisions close to the chest, back braced for the weight. He watched the horse, he watched his men, and he watched the grim ledger in his head that balanced risk against responsibility. There were only so many broken bones a ranch could afford in a season. There were only so many chances you could give an animal that seemed determined to destroy everything it touched. He kept his hands in his pockets and his eyes on the corral. He didn't want to do this, but he couldn't see another way. A few miles away, where Main Street curled around the bar, a figure stood in the shadows. Jack Raw had learned how to take up less space than a ghost. He was a tall man, made smaller by wear and tear, wrapped in an old olive field jacket that had seen too many winters and too many nights sleeping on hard ground. Stubble mapped his jawline, and his eyes looked like they hadn't known real sleep in years. He clutched a torn backpack like it held his last secret. When the townsfolk noticed him, which they tried not to, they'd look away fast. "Freeloader," someone muttered near the bar. "Soldier boy who never took to real work," said another. Jack didn't answer. He'd learned a long time ago you couldn't argue with ghosts. His eyes were on the road, but his attention was snagged by the long line of fence posts marking the edge of Carter Ranch. He found himself watching the place the way you watch a slow-burning fire, caught between the urge to walk away and the fear of what happens if you do. He could see the black horse moving in the distant corral, a storm cloud trapped behind boards. And Jack knew that feeling. He just wasn't sure what he was supposed to do about it. Not yet. By afternoon, the rumor had a time and a date. One of the young hands had let it slip at the general store. "Sam's decided," the boy had said, his voice a mix of relief and importance. "Vet's coming out at dawn. Needle and it's done." The clerk just nodded, his face calm. "About time," he said, already thinking about who he would tell next. By sunset, the story had worked its way into every corner of Red Hollow. At the forge, old men treated the news like an overdue bill finally being paid. "Should have done it weeks ago," one said, and the others grunted in agreement. Outside the bar, two boys were kicking a bet into the dust. Would the horse go down quiet, or would it try to climb the fence one last time? The whole town was turning the animal's death into an event. They talked about it like a coming storm, figuring out where to park their trucks to get the best view, wondering if it was okay to bring the kids. No one used the word death. They said put down, take care of, end it. They used words like tools to keep the world neat and tidy. Sheriff Dalton heard the news like everyone else. He was a broad-shouldered man whose leather holster squeaked when he moved. He listened, set down his coffee, and gave a single sharp nod. "I'll be there," he said. He told himself it was for crowd control, but a part of him just wanted to watch a problem get erased without him having to lift a finger. Dalton liked things simple, legal or illegal, safe or dangerous. A wild horse that wouldn't be tamed was just a loose thread, and he was glad someone was finally coming to cut it. He had no idea how tangled that thread was about to get. Back at the bar, Jack sat in a corner where the light didn't reach. He was nursing a cheap whiskey, watching the dust motes dance in the sliver of light from the door. The talk found him anyway. "They'll give it the shot," a rancher at the counter said, "quick and clean." "Carter finally made the call," another voice added. "Man's got to run a ranch." Jack stared into the amber liquid in his glass. He wasn't seeing the bar. He was seeing a different sunrise under a different sky, with dust that tasted of sand and smoke. He remembered the shriek of metal under pressure. The image that swam up from the bottom of his glass wasn't a horse. It was a man. A friend. A man with a grin that always showed more teeth on the left side, lying on the wrong side of a collapsed wall. Jack blinked, and the bar swam back into focus, but the weight in his chest didn't leave. Near the door, someone laughed. "Damn horse'll be dead by the time my coffee's brewed." The joke got a few chuckles, the mean kind that bounced off the ceiling and landed ugly. Jack's jaw tightened. He tried to swallow the words, but one slipped out, a rough whisper aimed only at his glass. "Waste." The man next to him glanced over. "What's that?" he asked. Jack lifted his head, and the other man looked away fast, because whatever was in Jack's eyes didn't want company. He thought of the corral, of the black body trapped inside, charging the walls because somewhere in its past, standing still had been a mistake. He thought of all the names they called it. Devil, monster, problem. Then he thought of the names they called him. Freeloader, drunk, stray. And it hit him all at once, a truth so heavy and obvious it nearly knocked the breath out of him. To them, he and that horse were the same thing. Waste, too much trouble to fix, too unpredictable to keep, too alive to just leave alone. The thought of that black head dropping between the rails, of that fire in its eyes going out under the cold prick of a needle, it made something inside Jack's chest, something he thought had died in the desert, lift its head and look around. He didn't have a plan. He didn't have anything, except for the sudden burning need not to be the kind of man who watched one more living thing go under without a fight. The night fell over Red Hollow like a shroud. The wind scraped its edge across the plains, kicking up dust devils that danced like ghosts in the pale moonlight. Out at Carter Ranch, the world had gone quiet. The bunkhouse was dark, even the yard dogs were curled up tight, but from the far end of the yard, a sound carried on the cold air, a steady guttural breath, the sound of a caged storm that couldn't sleep. The ground trembled with the impact of hooves on hard-packed clay. The quiet didn't feel like peace, it felt like the pause before the thunder breaks. Jack Raw walked out of the bar and didn't stop. He followed the gravel road out of town, the wind tearing at his old army jacket. He carried nothing but the pack on his back and a stubbornness in his stride that had kept him alive when everything else had failed. By the time he reached the corral, the air smelled of horse sweat and fear. He stopped just outside the fence and laid a hand on the top rail. The wood was rough, scarred by teeth and iron. He gripped it tight and stared into the darkness. The horse was a massive shadow inside the bigger shadow of the pen. It shifted and the ground shook. Jack didn't move. He just watched, feeling like he'd been walking toward this spot his whole life without knowing it. Onyx sensed him there. The horse's head snapped around, ears flat, eyes flashing like embers in the dark. A sound tore from its throat, not a whinny, but a low, thunderous roar that vibrated through the fence rails. Then it charged. The earth exploded under its hooves. The impact rattled the entire corral. The boards screamed under the weight, groaning as if they were about to give way. The beast struck again, slamming its chest against the barrier, teeth bared. Any other man would have run. Jack didn't even flinch. He stayed right where he was, his feet planted in the dirt, his eyes locked on the fury in front of him. He'd seen worse things charge him. He'd watched skies burn and walls fall. This was just another storm. The horse reared, its massive form blotting out the moon, and slammed down again, foam flying from its lips. Jack breathed in the dust and the rage, and then quietly he spoke. "I know," he said. His voice was a rasp, barely louder than the wind. He wasn't trying to tame it. He was making a confession. "I know what it's like," he whispered, "to be locked in, to be seen as nothing but a monster." The words hung in the air, raw and simple. Behind them were all the things Jack never spoke of. The battlefield, the friends left behind in the sand, the towns that looked through him like he was glass. He knew what it was to be feared and despised and thrown away. Onyx froze mid-strike. Its massive chest heaved, steam curling from its nostrils. For a long, silent moment, the animal just stood there, every muscle trembling, caught between destruction and something else. Then slowly, something shifted. Its head dropped an inch, its ears twitched. The fire in its eyes didn't go out, but it dimmed to a glow that Jack recognized. It was fear. But as Jack stared, he saw something else. In the faint moonlight, as the horse turned its head, he caught a glimpse of something under the tangled mane, high on the neck. It wasn't a scar, it was a mark, a brand, but it wasn't a ranch brand. It was a strange, jagged symbol, like a bolt of lightning with a circle around it. Jack's blood went cold. He'd seen that mark before, years ago. In a place far from Wyoming, a place whispered about among soldiers who'd seen the worst of the world. It was the mark of a brutal, illegal training outfit that used pain and terror to break animals for war contracts and underground fighting rings. They didn't use ropes and patience. They used chains and fire and fear. And suddenly, Jack didn't just feel a connection to this horse. He knew its story. He knew where the monster had been made. And the rage that had been a dull ember in his own chest for years suddenly roared into a fire. This wasn't just a wild animal. This was a survivor, just like him. The stallion took a shaky step back. Its breathing was still heavy, but the violence was gone, replaced by a deep, shuddering exhaustion. They stood there, two outcasts staring at each other across a fence, bound by a secret no one else in Red Hollow could possibly understand. And Jack knew the fight wasn't over. It had just begun. Morning broke over Carter Ranch without mercy. The sun was a hard, white glare, sharpening every edge and baking the dust. The yard was already filling up. The whole town had come, their trucks parked along the highway, thermoses steaming in their hands. They stood in quiet, nervous knots, their eyes all drawn to the corral at the far end of the yard. It was a public execution, and Red Hollow wouldn't miss it. The door to the main house opened, and Samuel Carter stepped out. His stride was slow, the walk of a man carrying the weight of his decision. He paused, his gaze sweeping over his crew, over the townspeople. His voice was low and heavy. "It'll be over soon," he said. "Dr. Leland is here. He'll bring what's needed." The words landed like stones. From the edge of the crowd, Hank Doyle let out a rough, satisfied laugh. "Finally," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "Rid of that curse. That thing's not a horse, it's a demon with hooves. And you don't reason with demons, you kill 'em." The stallion inside the pen answered with a crash against the boards, and Hank's grin widened. He looked like a man about to get everything he wanted. But Jack Raw was watching. He stood at the edge of the yard, his hands clenched on the straps of his pack. He heard every word. He saw Hank's cruel satisfaction. And he remembered the brand under Onyx's mane. He thought of the men who used that brand, the kind of men who find pleasure in breaking things. And he wondered, how did a horse like that end up at Carter Ranch? How did it end up under Hank Doyle's authority? The pieces started clicking into place, forming a picture so ugly Jack could taste it. Hank hadn't just found a wild horse. He'd sought it out. He'd probably bought it for pennies from those butchers, betting his own brand of cruelty could succeed where theirs had failed. He thought he could break a thing that was already shattered. And when he couldn't, when the horse fought back with the only language it knew, Hank had labeled it a monster. He hadn't just failed to tame it. He had provoked it, tortured it, and then sentenced it to death to cover his own failure. The whole town was here to watch the end of a story that Hank himself had written. And Jack's vow from the night before, whispered into the darkness, now became a roar inside his head. "Not this time. I won't just watch." Dr. Leland, the vet, stepped forward. He was a decent man, his shoulders squared with a duty he clearly didn't enjoy. He opened a metal case, and the morning sun glinted off a long syringe. He drew a pale liquid into the barrel, his hands steady but his jaw tight. A truck rumbled through the gate, and Sheriff Dalton climbed out. He was a big man, his face like stone. He planted himself near the gate, his hand resting casually on the butt of his revolver. "Keep order," he barked, his eyes scanning the crowd, but his gaze lingered on Hank Doyle for a second too long. There was a flicker of suspicion there, a sense that the sheriff knew there was more to this story. Hank didn't notice. He was prowling near the gate, his eyes glittering with impatience. "Do it quick," he growled at Sam Carter. "End it now before it kills someone." Sam Carter looked at the horse, then at the vet, then at the crowd. The weight of it all was crushing him. Finally, he gave a slow, deliberate nod. "Do it," he said. The words fell like an iron gate slamming shut. The decision was final, the sentence delivered. Dr. Leland eased the corral gate open. The hinge squealed, a sound that scraped across every nerve in the yard. He stepped inside, the syringe held carefully in his palm. The crowd fell silent. Inside the pen, Onyx saw the man and the needle, and he answered with a sound of pure fury. He slammed his hooves, the ground shuddering. He drove his chest into the rails, the wood groaning. People flinched back. It felt like there were only seconds left. Seconds until the needle found its mark. Seconds until the massive body folded and fell. And then the crowd gasped. Someone shouted. A man was shoving his way through the bodies, moving with a desperate speed. It was Jack Raw. "What's he doing?" someone screamed. "That fool wants to die," another voice yelled. But Jack was already at the gate. He slid the panel back and stepped into the dust, placing himself directly between the vet and the horse. Sheriff Dalton's hand dropped to his holster. "Roar, get out of there now," he bellowed. "I'm not asking." Hank Doyle's face twisted in rage. "Let the devil smash the fool," he snarled. "It'll serve him right." Jack ignored them all. He didn't look at the crowd, or the vet, or the sheriff. His eyes were locked on the furious stallion. Onyx responded instantly. He reared back, whites of his eyes blazing, and then he launched himself forward, a black thunderbolt tearing across the pen. The ground shook, dirt flew, the sound of his hooves was a drumbeat of doom. The crowd screamed. Dr. Leland scrambled backward, dropping his case. The syringe rolled uselessly in the dust. Dalton wrenched his pistol from its holster, leveling it, his finger tightening on the trigger. Jack didn't move. He just stood there, his arms spread wide, his jaw set. The horse was almost on him. 10 yards, 5, 3. "I'm here," Jack whispered, a promise against the roar. "I won't leave you." And then the impossible happened. The stallion's hooves dug into the earth, tearing furrows in the hard-packed clay. He skidded to a halt, so close Jack could feel the furnace blast of his breath. The massive horse stood there, quivering, not with rage, but with something else. Then slowly, as if the movement cost him everything, he lowered his head. He brought the thick, scarred bone of his brow and rested it gently against Jack's shoulder. He leaned his weight into the ragged man, not an attack, but a surrender, a plea, a contact made against every memory of pain that told him it was a mistake. Absolute silence fell over the yard. It was a silence so thick you could feel it pressing on your eardrums. Hands flew to mouths. Men who had come to see a monster killed stood frozen, their arms crossed so tight their knuckles were white. Hank Doyle's face went pale, his mask of cruel certainty cracking apart. Sheriff Dalton's pistol lowered, his expression shifting from authority to sheer dumbfounded confusion. He holstered his weapon with a loud snap that made everyone jump. Jack didn't move. He was shaking, his knees wanting to buckle, but he stood his ground. He slowly raised a trembling hand and laid it on the stallion's warm, slick neck. He could feel the hammering of the horse's heart gradually slowing, matching the rhythm of his own. He pressed his forehead against the coarse mane. "We made it," he whispered into the black hair. "At least for today." But he knew today wasn't enough. The real fight was still coming. He straightened up, turned, and faced the stunned crowd. He faced Sam Carter. He faced Hank Doyle. His voice was no longer a whisper. It was clear and hard as iron. "This horse isn't a monster," he said, his voice carrying across the silent yard. "He's a victim, and I can prove it." He reached out and gently pushed back the stallion's tangled mane, revealing the jagged, ugly brand on its neck. "Ask your foreman," Jack said, his eyes locking onto Hank Doyle, "what this brand means. Ask him where this horse really came from." A wave of confusion rippled through the crowd. All eyes turned from the brand to Hank Doyle. Hank's face, which had been pale with shock, now flushed a dark, mottled red. "He's lying," Hank spat, his voice cracking. "It's just some stray mark. This drifter is crazy." But the lie was plain on his face, the sweat beading on his upper lip, the way his eyes darted around, looking for an escape. Sheriff Dalton took a step forward, his hand once again resting on his holster. "Well, Hank?" The sheriff's voice was dangerously quiet. "Why don't you tell us?" Sam Carter stared at his foreman, his face a mask of dawning horror. He was seeing the truth in Hank's panic, in the cornered animal look in his eyes. He remembered how cagey Hank had been about where the horse came from, the impossibly low price he claimed he'd paid. Clara Carter, Sam's wife, stepped down from the porch. "He saw what we wouldn't," she said, her voice trembling but clear, aimed at her husband. "Not fury, fear." Jack's voice cut through the tension. "That brand belongs to the Red Circle outfit," he said, and a few of the older ranchers in the crowd gasped. The name was whispered poison, a legend of cruelty that most thought was just a ghost story. "They don't break horses, they shatter them. They use chains and fire and things I won't speak of in front of your children. They sell the survivors to men who think cruelty is the same as strength." He took a step toward Hank, and Onyx moved with him, a silent, massive shadow at his shoulder. You bought him cheap, didn't you, Hank? You thought you could finish the job they started, but he wouldn't break for you either. He fought back. So you decided to kill him to hide your own brutal failure. The truth landed and the mood of the crowd tipped. The fear they'd felt for the horse was curdling, shifting, and redirecting itself toward the man who had lied to them all. Hank saw it. He saw the trust in his boss's eyes die. He saw the respect of the men he commanded evaporate. He saw the whole world he had built on a foundation of fear and control crumbling at his feet. And he snapped. With a primal roar of his own, Hank lunged. Not at Jack. He shoved past him, grabbing the heavy coil of rope he'd been carrying. "I'll show you a broken animal," he screamed, his eyes wild. He swung the rope, the thick knot at the end whistling through the air, aimed straight at Onyx's head. But Onyx was no longer the crazed, cornered animal from before. He saw the threat, but he didn't bolt, he didn't rear. He moved with a speed and precision that was terrifying. He sidestepped the blow, and in the same fluid motion, he drove his shoulder hard into Hank's chest. It wasn't a killing blow, it was a statement. Hank went flying, landing in a heap in the dust, the wind knocked out of him, gasping like a fish. The rope fell from his limp fingers. Onyx stood over him, nostrils flaring, a low growl rumbling in his chest. He could have ended him right there, a single stomp of a hoof, but he didn't. He looked from the pathetic man on the ground back to Jack, as if asking a question. Sheriff Dalton was on Hank in a second, hauling him to his feet, twisting his arm behind his back. "It's over, Hank," Dalton said, his voice flat and final. Sam Carter walked forward, his steps heavy. He stopped in front of the foreman he had trusted for 15 years. There was no anger in his face, only a deep, profound disappointment. "Get off my land," Sam said, the words quiet but absolute. "Now." Dalton didn't need to be told twice. He marched the sputtering, defeated Hank Doyle toward the gate, the townspeople parting before them in silent condemnation. The show was over, but not the one they had come to see. Sam turned his gaze to Jack and the black stallion standing beside him. He looked at the mark on the horse's neck, then at the exhaustion and fierce loyalty in Jack's eyes. He saw the two of them, man and horse, both survivors, both branded by a cruel world, who had found in each other a reason to stand their ground. He took off his hat. "The horse lives," Sam Carter said, his voice ringing with a conviction that settled the dust. Then he looked straight at Jack. "And so does the man." He held out a hand. "You have a job here, Mr. Raw, if you'll take it." Word of what happened at Carter Ranch spread through Red Hollow like a flood. The story changed with every telling, growing more fantastic, more miraculous. But the core of it remained. The Black Devil had bowed to a beggar, and the town's biggest bully had been exposed and cast out. The change wasn't instant. There were still whispers, still doubts. But something fundamental had shifted in the hard, practical heart of the town. Samuel Carter was a man of his word. That very afternoon, he took down the old sign that read Carter Ranch. He put up a new one, freshly painted. It said Haven Ranch. The name was a promise, a declaration. This would no longer be a place that measured an animal's worth by its utility. It would be a place for the broken, the discarded, the ones the world had given up on. It would be a place to heal. And the work began. They tore down the old brutal corral and built a larger open paddock. They reinforced stalls, widened doorways, and laid down fresh, clean straw. Jack Raw was no longer a ghost. He had a purpose. He moved with a quiet authority that the other hands, shamed by their treatment of him, now respected. He was the one who understood the language of fear. He was the one who knew that true strength wasn't about breaking a thing, but about having the patience to let it heal. Onyx was his shadow. The massive stallion was never far from his side. His presence among the other animals was a strange, calming force. He was the guardian of the broken, the silent king of the outcasts. Soon others started to arrive. A truck would pull up the gravel road, carrying a trailer with a lame mare, a one-eyed gelding, a filly that trembled at the sound of a raised voice. They came from all over, drawn by the story of the man and the horse who had refused to be broken. Each time, Jack would be there at the gate. He would speak to the animal first, his voice a low murmur before he ever spoke to the owner. He and Onyx would lead the new arrival into the sanctuary. Red Hollow watched. At first, they watched with suspicion. But seeing a wounded thing grow calm has its own power. People who came to scoff found themselves staying to watch. Women started showing up with fresh-baked bread and old blankets. The town that had gathered to watch a killing now came to witness small daily acts of healing. Sheriff Dalton became a regular visitor, leaning against his truck, watching the work, a quiet respect in his eyes. He never said much, but one day he reached through the fence and let a scarred old horse sniff his palm. It was his way of saying sorry. Months turned into a year. Haven Ranch became more than just a place. It became an idea. Jack learned the names of the volunteers who came from town. He learned the stories of the animals in his care. Onyx grew sleek and powerful, the fire in his eyes now a warm, steady glow. The terror was gone, replaced by a profound and unshakable trust in the man who had stood for him. One evening, as the sun bled red across the sky, Jack walked with Onyx into the new open paddock. He carried no saddle, no bridle. He stopped, laid a hand on the stallion's powerful neck, and whispered, "If you'll have me." Onyx lowered his head, a soft nicker of consent. With a smooth, practiced motion, Jack swung himself onto the stallion's bare back. He didn't grab for mane, he simply rested his hands on the horse's withers. For a moment, Onyx tensed, an old memory of pain flickering through his muscles. Jack breathed out, long and slow, and the horse relaxed beneath him. They took a single step, then another, moving as one across the field. From the porch, Sam and Clara Carter watched, their arms around each other. The hands stopped their work, leaning on their tools, silent witnesses. The man and the horse circled the field, their shared shadow stretching long in the fading light. They were not a master and a possession. They were two survivors, two friends, who had saved each other. They had found their haven. The years collected like leaves in the fall. Winters came and went. The sign for Haven Ranch weathered and was repainted, the letters always bold and clear. Jack's hair turned from grey to white. The lines on his face deepened, but they were carved by wind and sun and laughter, not by ghosts. Onyx grew old with him, his powerful body slowing, his muzzle turning frosty grey. He never lost the gleam in his eye, the proud arch of his neck. They were a fixture, a living legend. The old man and his black horse, walking the fence line, watching over their flock of misfits. One winter morning, when the sky was the color of pewter and snow was a promise on the wind, Jack was sitting on the porch of the small cabin Sam had built for him. Onyx stood beside him, his head lowered, his warmth a comfort against the cold. The stallion's breathing was shallow. Jack laid his palm on the familiar spot where neck met shoulder and felt the rhythm of the great heart slowing. He didn't call for help. This moment was theirs alone. "I'm here, boy," he whispered, his voice thick. "I'm right here." The great head leaned into him one last time, a final gentle pressure. The last breath went out in a soft, warm cloud and did not return. They buried him under the big cottonwood tree, on a small rise overlooking the fields he had roamed in peace. The whole ranch gathered, and many from the town came too. They didn't mourn a monster. They paid their respects to a king. Jack stood by the simple stone marker long after everyone else had gone, one hand resting on the cold rock. The story of the man and the horse didn't end there. It became a part of Red Hollow, a tale told to new generations to explain the meaning of courage and grace. Haven Ranch thrived, a testament to the idea that nothing is ever truly broken beyond repair. Jack lived out his years there, a quiet, gentle man who had found his purpose. And sometimes, when the evening light slanted just right across the fields, people would swear they could see it. The long, familiar shadow of a man and a horse walking together, forever watching over their home. Thank you for staying with us for this incredible story. We'd love to hear what you think. Was there a moment that truly moved you? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this journey of redemption, please give this video a thumbs up, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you subscribe to our channel for more stories that touch the heart. Don't forget to hit that notification bell so you never miss an update.